This next panel is relevant to all of us. It's about nutritious foods. It's about diversifying our diet. Everybody should be paying attention. Panel do walk on stage. Thank you so much. If you walk, they applaud. Very good. Take a seat. I want to tell you about the moderator, Allison Aubrey. She is the health and food correspondent at NPR. If you ever get to go on a tour of NPR, the headquarters is right here in DC. The tours are free, my favorite price. If you get to go to the canteen, there's wallpaper on the canteen with quotes from the correspondents. What's your favorite quote, Allison, on that wallpaper?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot.
Indeed. Turning the tables, flipping the script.
Oh, okay. Well, I can tell you the one I contributed it. It said, NPR is curiosity and the passion to awaken it in others.
That's so beautiful. It's amazing. It's like reading some famous quote from somebody else, but it's from you. Thank you. This is a good start, panel. I hope you can keep up. Allison Aubrey and your panel. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Before we get started, I wanted to tell you a little story. Earlier this year, I was writing a story about the Lancet Eat study. Some of you may be aware of it. It was kind of controversial. Came to the conclusion that a diet that is good for people, healthy for people, and healthy for the planet would be one that is lower in meat consumption, at least in terms of what Americans eat. Be closer to having 1 hamburger per week. So I wrote that story on a Wednesday, and that afternoon I went to pick up my daughter Lillian. She's 8 years old. And after we went through, how was your day? What did you do? What did you write about today, Mommy? And I told her about the study, and she kind of looked at me. I looked in the rearview mirror, and when I told her that researchers had determined, by one estimate, if you simply swapped eating beef for beans, that the US could get closer to our greenhouse gas reduction goals. And at that point, she was very confused. I had to explain, well, when you produce meat, you need a lot of land, and you need a lot of water to grow the grain, to feed the animals. And I could tell it was just getting very complicated for her. And finally, she just shook her head. And when I told her the sort of bean to beef swap, she said, you know what? That's just not going to work for me. And she said, but I do like chickpeas. And I tell you that story because I think we all have a knee-jerk reaction if somebody tells us you can't eat something, you can't do something. And really, as more people begin to connect the dots between what we eat and how that might influence the planet, we're starting to have this dialogue. But I think, based on my own daughter's reaction to this, that it's going to be a very long dialogue. So that's really what we're going to be talking about here today. I would say the Twitter version of what this panel really is the question, how do we grow the plate that's really healthy for us to eat, and by us I mean all of us around the globe, while doing as little damage as possible to the planet. So now I'd like to introduce you guys to the panel. Jessica Fanzo, she's the Bloomberg Distinguished Associate Professor of Ethics and Global Food and Agriculture at Johns Hopkins University. Greg Garrett is Director of Food Policy and Financing at the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. That is a Swiss foundation based in Geneva. And Ashok Gulati is the Infosys Chair Professor for Agriculture at the India Council for Research on International Economic Relations. So Jessica, I want to start with you. You focus a lot on the links between agriculture, nutrition, health, and the environment. Why don't you set the stage for helping us to understand the difference between focusing on nutrition versus focusing on food security?
Yeah, so I think many of you in the room know the definition of food security. It's ensuring everyone in the world has access to a healthy diet. I think when you start to dig deeper into nutrition, food security is essential for nutrition, but it's not enough. Nutrition requires multiple sectors, multiple actions. It involves WASH, it involves women's empowerment, it involves reducing poverty, involves a functioning health system. So just solving the food diet piece of nutrition, although the most essential piece for nutrition, you need these other actions to come into play. And that's why the water report from the Chicago Council is so important in showing the links between water and food to improve nutrition.
So basically you're saying that good nutrition is much, much bigger and broader than simply having food security.
Right, but both very difficult to achieve globally.
And Greg, I want to tee this question up for you. Really what your group does is to try to broker, as I understand it, tell me if I'm wrong, to try to broker investment money from the investor to the investee. Maybe you could just help us understand this world a little bit better. What does collaboration with the private sector look like when you're talking about improving nutrition?
Sure. Well, maybe I'll start by saying that at GAIN, we have sort of a working definition of the private sector, which might be a bit broader than sometimes we talk about in circles like this. I think there's sometimes a risk that you might end up talking about multinational companies, which are important private sector players. But we've talked a lot this morning about smallholder farmers. So clearly they're in the private sector. Micro enterprise, small and medium enterprises, as well as national companies. And we just completed a study because we wanted to quantify, well, how much food, we know how much food is produced by smallholder farmers, but how much food is then handled and stored and transported and marketed by small and medium enterprises in Africa. And the study showed 75% of dairy, meat, cereals are handled and transported by small and medium enterprises. So we're engaging with this group quite significantly and feel that that's probably where we can get a lot of new initiatives going.
And this is across the globe?
Across the globe, but we're primarily focused in Africa and Asia and high-burden countries where we see a lot of malnutrition.
Got it. Okay. And to you, Ashok, I know as more wealthy populations and more urban populations, as a population becomes more urban and wealthy, people demand different kinds of foods. You move more to the processed foods. Talk a little bit about how India is navigating this.
Well, India, the good news is for the last 25 years, it has an overall rate of growth of 7% per annum. And it's likely to be there for the next 10 to 15 years. So naturally, the diet diversification is going to go towards more vitamins, more protein, that. But the swap that you talked about, the beef to beans, if you want to see the real proof of that, it is India. It's the biggest producer of beans, it's the biggest consumer of beans, it's the biggest importer of beans. Our main diet protein is coming from pulses, what we call. Only 8% or less than 8% people consume beef. And there is a lesson there. 1 kilogram of beef, I was looking at how much water it will consume to produce the feed material as well as washing and other things. It's about 15,000 liters of water per kilogram of beef. So from the environmental point of view and water drawdown point of view, I think chicken, pressure is going on chicken, but only 38% people in India take chicken, 32% people take fish, and less than 8% take beef. And this is where the culture and agriculture both are environmentally much more sustainable and making towards better what Lancet says, take more of fruits, vegetables, and beans. So that's what India is.
You know, Greg, let's talk a little bit about what sort of a baby step looks like when a country wants to move towards a more nutrient-dense diet. You talked about doing some work in Kenya. You helped do some soft investments with, I guess, a small entity or a small group, the way you just described, helping connect a group to a funder that was trying to produce fortified porridge. Talk a little bit about how that deal went down and why you see providing an investment structure for fortified porridge is an important step for a country like Kenya.
Yeah, so if indeed the food systems in, say, Africa are dominated by these small and medium enterprises, there's a clear missing middle of finance. And report after report shows this, and we all know it's the case. You know, they can't really access, they're not big enough to access standard commercial loans. Often too small to access microcredit as well. So there's missing middle. And with this particular case that you brought up in Kenya, we were able to simply be a broker. We did not actually handle the funds, but we found the investor that was interested in a nutrition-sensitive investment that was a soft loan, but was returned with small interest that was able to help this company purchase the equipment, purchase the other types of inputs they needed to fortify the product, to market the product, to better label the product. And it was viable. It was a viable deal in the end. And we actually have just completed a pipeline analysis in Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, and Nigeria showing there's at least 107 companies that fit the investability criteria that we put in place with our advisors. So we're excited. We think there's a real need to ensure funds are looking at small and medium agri-food businesses as investable opportunities in Africa for nutrition.
And Jessica, when you hear stories like this, here's a success story, you're helping get finance to a company that's taking a porridge, fortifying it. What do you think? I know fortification of cereals is part and parcel of the strategy to get people, move people towards a more nutrient-dense diet. But I can't help think about what happened in this country when we moved too much towards fortifying things like sugary cereals and other processed foods that ended up not being so great for us, and we've had to sort of walk the other direction and make this cultural shift towards, oh, well, it turns out whole foods are better, and we shouldn't have been fortifying all those refined carbohydrates and making it look like healthy food. Do you see, talk a little bit about the role of fortification and whether you see the rest of the world potentially making a mistake that we sort of made here?
I mean, I don't think fortification was a mistake. I think it was a profound, important public health move, and we don't see some of the micronutrient deficiencies in this country because
point,
of
like folate,
fortification, right?
right,
Most of our staple grains, our milk, our baby foods are fortified, and it's been a really important public health measure. Iodized salt, right? It's one of the one of the few success stories in nutrition. But I think it's one piece of an intervention, but we need many more. I mean, we are globally moving towards a suboptimal diet. When you look across all countries, including India, sorry, Ashok, but we're seeing this move towards unhealthy foods, that are high in salt, sugar, unhealthy fats, processed, overly processed, packaged type foods. They're tasty, they're cheap. I like my potato chips with my cold beer during happy hour, but I mean, but really, we are,
so human. This is just
but it's too much of that. It's too little of the good stuff. Yeah. And this is being reflected now on the massive malnutrition burden that we have. So there's the fortification piece, but there's lots of other interventions that we need governments to tackle, scale up, private sector, consumer knowledge, consumer education. There's many pieces. It's not simple to reshift the food system towards one that's healthier, but there are a lot of micro solutions out there that we need to scale up. So fortification's one, but we need to improve the food environments where people, they walk into a market, you walk into a supermarket or a restaurant or a corner store, and you have to make a choice. You bring with you all your baggage, all your influences, how much you want to spend. But that food environment can be incredibly perverse in the way it influences your decisions. The price point, the advertising, the positioning, the candy that's all along by the cash register. That's strategic, right? I mean, these are the things that are influencing our decisions. And so how do we reshape and reshift those food environments where citizens are going every day and making choices about food? Government plays a role. Private sector plays a role in all the facets and forms of private sector. But we also need to make it easier for consumers to be able to digest the information.
Ashok, as you hear that, what comes to mind? I mean, in India, talk a little bit about, are you trying to help farmers grow more nutritious things? Do you see fortification playing a role there? You're at the beginning of this process of many people in India having the money to walk into a shop and getting to make these decisions. How do you see it playing out in India?
Fortification, as you rightly said, iodine, salt, this is one of the success stories. But I look towards the future more than the normal type of fortification that we have been doing. iron-rich millet has been released, biofortified. Our soils are pretty deficient in zinc, which is leading to zinc deficiency in staples, wheat and rice, leading to stunting of children. In 2016, Government of India released zinc-rich rice, zinc-rich wheat. So government has an important role. Ag R&D, looking into that. I personally, I'm a guinea pig nowadays of blue and purple wheat. I don't know how many of you have tasted
Purple
that.
wheat.
Purple wheat, blue wheat, antioxidants in that are 6 to 8 times more than the normal wheat.
So they breed them to
this-
have more anthocyanins, or yeah.
So question is that governments have an important role, more R&D, and in poorer countries, it is the basic staples. If you can fortify that, then you can remove all those micronutrient deficiencies. And I think India is moving in that direction, and that would be the next revolution from food security to nutritional security.
Greg, as you look at this, you talked a little bit about the role of trying to bring financing to projects like the one in Kenya we talked about. Talk about the other levels, the other levers that we have, whether working with NGOs and government to come up with sort of incentives or disincentives to help nudge people to more nutritious things.
So let me rattle off 3.
Okay.
I'm thinking with fortification, I mean, clearly the mandates help when a country, levels the playing field and says all the industries have to add this correct amount of micronutrient for the public health good, but also incentives. A lot of countries have then said, well, we're going to provide a tax break, or any nutraceuticals, the vitamins and minerals that you import, there will be no taxes on that. So that's worked, and we've been involved in 12 different mandates around the world with countries. Another one is the Access to Nutrition Index, accountability measures. I don't know how many here have heard of the ATNI, but we really believe strongly that it's a very good initiative. We actually helped incubate it 7 years ago before it became an independent foundation. And what it does is it goes to the multinational companies and it rates them, the processed food companies, and says, okay, what are you doing in terms of sustainability? What are you doing in terms of nutrition? And there's emerging evidence that it's driving not only a good dialogue internally at those companies on how they can do better, but it's helping them reformulate so that they, have healthier food products. The third one is collective action among the private sector. There's something called the Scaling Up Nutrition Business Network, which we host with the World Food Program. And there's over a dozen networks, and they're driving forward commitments among the national companies, driving forward collective action so that they go to the government and advocate for better nutrition policies that also are helpful for business. And yeah, these are just 3 examples, I think, of how business can do something really good for nutrition.
And give one example. You said there's 12 policy initiatives in different countries. Give just one example.
Yeah, so I was speaking about the mandatory legislation of fortification. India has just mandated for their public distribution systems the use of fortified wheat flour and vitamin A enriched edible oil. So if you're in a school setting and you're a child, you're now getting vitamin A, you're now getting iron and folic acid, and the industry is a willing partner in that. That's the beauty of what's happening in India. In fact, Cargill, to call out positive, Cargill has for many years already been voluntarily adding vitamin A to their edible oils in India. So these are some examples.
And Jess, as you listen to this, particularly the point he was making about the ATNI, sort of just putting out there what large companies are doing in terms of sustainability, nutrient density, making that very transparent and available to people, that might somehow nudge the companies to reformulate just because of the information being out there. How confident are you that that moves the needle?
I think the ATNI is important. I think it's a race to the top. I mean, I think it's an important accountability measure, but I think we need more of that. I think private sector is feeling the pressure a bit on the push for healthier foods and healthier diets, being that diets are such a massive risk factor of disease and death now. I feel, and I could be wrong, but I feel the private sector has really, and particularly multinationals, have really taken up the sustainability piece. I think it really hits their bottom line. They're concerned about climate change and the decline of natural resources. It's really pivotal for them to be able to produce the commodities that go into their products. I don't feel that the health piece they've really taken on to its full capacity yet.
And why do you think that is?
I mean, I think maybe it's a bit of on the nutrition health side. There's a real hesitancy to partner with private sector. Historically with the nutrition community, a lot of conflicts of interest. I think private sector has been very demonized. There's a lot of mistrust due to historical practices of breaking the code on alternative breast milk substitutes. And so I think there's a historical mistrust with private sector. So people are quite concerned about fully engaging and trusting with private sector. But I mean, my hope and wish is that the private sector realizes, and I'm talking more about particularly the multinationals that are producing lots of food products that we consume every day. I hope that they realize that public health is really bad, you know, not ensuring that their consumers are healthy is really bad for business. Do they want consumers in the 21st century into the 22nd century? If they do, they're going to have to start thinking about public health and line it up with their profit goals. It's just absolutely going to have to happen. So that's my wish, and I hope that private sector really gets on board with ensuring that they have the public health, the environment, and the profit goals all lined up.
Can you think of a company that's sort of moving in that direction or making noises in that direction? Who would you point to as a leader to watch?
I think there's pieces of each. I mean, Greg can probably speak, and maybe Ashok can speak to it in India. I mean, I think there's definitely pieces of companies. You know, you have the corporate social responsibility arm, sometimes not taken as seriously as the larger portfolio of business companies, but I think Unilever has been really important. I think DSM has been important. I think pieces of Nestle, although sometimes somewhat blacklisted in the nutrition community for past
partisans.
Yeah, but I think there's arms of where they are all doing good things and wanting to come to the table, and I think it's time to really start thinking about how do we all work together instead of the continued demonizing of one or the other.
There are, thank you. So there are a few questions from the audience. We are going to take this question right here. The gentleman in the bow tie.
Hello, everybody. My name is Yanling. I'm an undergrad nutrition student from University of Pittsburgh. It's actually so nice to see you, Dr. Fanzo, from my screen, my home computer, where I take an online class with you, to realize here with you. Yes. My question is about organic farming. In our class online, we talk about organic farming and how our consumers right now want organic products for its beneficial health benefits, essentially. And consumers think that organic products are more sustainable. But actually, when we're thinking about global food production, if we only use organic farming, we can only feed 1/3 of world population. So what's your opinion on organic farming, and where are we going with it? Thank you.
Jessica?
Oh, me? You're looking at everybody, right? I mean, I think there's going to be lots of different agriculture systems that will feed the world well. I think there is a place for organic agriculture, particularly on some aspects emerging around food safety. I think Ashok can probably speak much more to this than I can, but I think there's going to be many different systems that will be, and many different types, not even just organic systems, but I think there's intensive systems, I think there's mixed smallholder farmer systems, and I think the fabric of all of those are going to have to be contributing to feeding the world.
Ashok?
You know, giving the example of India, the demand for organic food is increasing pretty fast. In fact, one state is declared totally organic, Sikkim. But your second part of the question was, can we feed the world? And India is going to be most populous country on this planet by 2024. If you want preference towards organic, first is the subsidies on fertilizers, the chemical fertilizers that we have been giving to increase production. I think you need to have a level playing field with organic versus non-organic. When you are giving all the incentives to produce more through chemical fertilizers, then the reach of organic, because yields are limited and the price is high, it's only you and me can afford, but the masses at the bottom, they want cheaper food. And for that, it's not going to be easy. So as you rightly said, Jessica, there is going to be differentiated production system for differentiated consumer markets.
Great, we have a question back here.
Thank you for this panel. Paul Miller, Lutheran World Relief, and I love Dr. Fanzo's response to the question, but I wanted to put it in another way. At this conference several years ago, there was a speech talking about how America would feed the world. The next speech was from a nutritionist, an American, who said, we're killing the world with a diet we're exporting. So one or two examples of things the US, what we've learned here in the United States, about this issue in terms of the private sector getting on board with health and improving diets. Something that the rest of the world could learn from the United States in terms of how we do well, in terms of convening unlikely partners to solve this problem, and something that, frankly, the rest of the world should not do.
Yeah, ooh, that's tough. Can we have time to think about it? Do you want to take a shot at it?
Oh, me? Oh, well. I mean, I'm going to gravitate back to something we have talked about, which I think America has really led the way with fortification. I'll start with that. First country to nationally fortify salt, along with Switzerland, about the same time in the 1920s. First country to add iron to wheat flour. A lot of technical expertise has gone out from this country to Africa in kind, from the very large milling companies in Minnesota and elsewhere. So I think that's one very, very good export of adding vitamins and minerals and letting other countries know how to do it and do it well and do it to the right levels, so it's not toxic and so it's also, you know, contributing to decreases in deficiency. So I'll go with that easy one, but maybe there's
I can go with the bad one.
Okay,
I'm,
great.
I'm really good at being the pessimist.
Here's what we should not export.
I mean, the obvious is this very kind of industrialized, overly, you know, highly processed packaged foods that don't align with healthy diets. And I think the data is quite clear on that now. And the question is, as countries urbanize, as they get wealthier, they undergo demographic and epidemiological and nutrition transitions. And so you have these very extreme type food systems, from very, very industrialized to very traditional rural. And as countries and economies emerge, how did they leapfrog over some of those same mistakes? But I have to say, I mean, the trends are not good, right? And this is the problem, this exportation of the Western American diet. It doesn't look great for Africa. It doesn't look great for Asia. It doesn't look great for Southeast Asia. So what do we do? What do we do about this? I mean, obesity is just skyrocketing, and you're seeing these processed packaged foods in the most deeply rural places. So, I mean, I ask all of you, what do we do about this, right? How do we stop this trend of what has been really detrimental to United States healthcare, Mexico, Australia, now South Africa, now North Africa? I mean, this is a big issue, and this is where we really have to have governments govern their food system. They have to start caring about this issue. I mean, even this room is half empty, right? Why is this room half empty? It blows my mind. You know, I just saw a picture on Twitter the other day of Kenya. Their parliament was meeting to talk about food security and climate change. There was 3 parliamentarians in the room in Kenya. That's insane. I mean, when are we going to get governments to care? When are we going to get private sector to really behave well? To me, it's a massive issue, and I have I have no answers. But I mean, it's just, it's a grand challenge for all of us to get really creative about this.
I always tell people that covering food and agriculture and nutrition in a newsroom, and it's hard to get attention at all because the news is obsessed with something that's killing somebody suddenly today. And I cover things that might kill you over a lifetime. And so it's really hard to get people to stay focused on that. Dariush Mozaffarian loves to say that 1,000 deaths a day are linked to cardiovascular deaths from poor diets. And he said, if there were 1,000 people a day dying from, you name it, and pick your epidemic, people would be paying attention to that. But over time, it's just this slow acceptance that that's the way it is. We sort of laugh, oh, I didn't eat so well today. We make a joke about it because it's a little bit uncomfortable, and it plays out over decades. So sometimes it's hard, I think, for people to have a sense of urgency about it. And guess what? The clock is at 0. I think that's all. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.